An apparently ordinary night turns to horror when a pregnant woman is brutally attacked inside her own home. The crime, committed by the man who promised to protect her, unleashes the fury of a father willing to move the world for justice. And when the truth comes to light, what emerges is not just a case, it's a war. If you enjoy stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The Thompson mansion had always had silence as its ally. Located in one of New York City's most exclusive neighborhoods, the property boasted impeccable gardens, high gates, and a facade that inspired respect and distance. But on that October night, the silence concealed something different, something that pulsed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Isabella Thompson Miller walked barefoot across the marble floor of the living room. Her right hand clutched her cell phone tightly, her fingers trembling slightly. The screen illuminated her pale face, revealing wide eyes that scanned line after line of messages. Messages that were not hers. Messages that tore through the veil of a life she thought she knew. You were beautiful today. I can't stop thinking about you. Your wife will never understand you the way I do. The name that repeated in the conversations was Vanessa, a name Isabella had never heard before that night, a name that now burned in her mind like a live coal. She scrolled again, desperately searching for something to justify, to explain, to turn this into a misunderstanding. But each new message only confirmed what her heart already knew. Edward was having an affair. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Isabella turned quickly, hiding the phone behind her back. Edward Miller entered the room with the relaxed posture of someone who had just stepped out of the shower. Damp hair, a dress shirt open at the top buttons, impeccable tailored trousers. He looked like a magazine ad, the kind of man people admired at social events. Handsome, successful, charming, the perfect facade. "Still awake?" he asked with a superficial smile, heading to the bar built into the mahogany wall. Isabella felt her heart race. She needed to confront him. She needed to hear the truth. But the words caught in her throat, trapped by months of a marriage she now realized was built on lies. Edward poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid sliding smoothly into the crystal glass. He took a slow sip, savoring it, before finally looking at his wife. "You're pale. Did something happen?" Isabella took a deep breath. The hand holding the phone trembled so much she had to brace it against her own thigh. She was 7 months pregnant. Her pronounced belly was a constant reminder that this conversation would not affect just her. "Who is Vanessa?" The question came out firmer than she expected. Edward froze for a fraction of a second, the glass halfway, to his lips. Then slowly he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Vanessa," he repeated, as if the name were foreign. Isabella held up the phone, showing the illuminated screen. Edward sighed theatrically and placed the glass on the counter with a sharp click. "You went through my phone? Don't change the subject. Who is she?" Edward moved closer, and Isabella instinctively took a step back. He noticed the movement and stopped, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture that seemed rehearsed. "Isabella, you're pregnant. Your hormones are raging. You're seeing things that aren't there." "I saw the messages, Edward. I read everything." "And what exactly do you think you read?" he retorted, his voice taking on a cutting edge. "Work conversations? Vanessa is on the marketing team. We have meetings almost every day." "Meetings where you tell her she's beautiful? Where you say you love her?" Edward laughed, a low, almost condescending laugh that made Isabella feel like she was going insane. "You're being hysterical. You're seeing romance where there's only professionalism. It's always been like this with you, Isabella. Always so insecure, always looking for problems." His words were like blades, cutting away, piece by piece, of the confidence she had in herself. Isabella felt her eyes burn, but she wouldn't let the tears fall. Not yet. "I'm not crazy, Edward." "No? Then explain to me what you're doing here in the middle of the night, snooping through my phone, accusing me of cheating based on what? A few friendly messages? Do you realize how sick that sounds?" Isabella clutched the phone tighter. This wasn't the first time Edward had made her feel small, insignificant, questioning her own sanity. In recent months, he had become increasingly distant, more critical, more controlling. But she always found excuses. His work was stressful. She was sensitive because of the pregnancy. They were just normal phases of a marriage. But those messages weren't normal, and deep down, Isabella knew it. "I want the truth, Edward." "The truth?" He took a step forward, and this time, Isabella didn't back away. "The truth is you're suffocating me. You're paranoid, obsessive. I can barely breathe in this house without you questioning me, watching me, accusing me. Do you think that's healthy? For you? For the baby?" That last question was like a punch to the gut. Isabella brought her free hand to her belly, a protective, instinctive gesture. Edward noticed, and his expression softened, but there was something calculated in that change. "Look at yourself, Isabella. You're destroying yourself over nothing. You're going to end up harming our child with this unnecessary stress." The manipulation was subtle but effective. Isabella felt doubt begin to creep into her mind. What if he was right? What if she really was overreacting? What if those messages were just misunderstandings by a tired, hormonal mind? But then she remembered a specific message, one that left no room for interpretation. "I can't wait to be in your arms." Again. "You make me feel alive in a way she never could." There was no way to twist that. There was no way to turn those words into something professional or innocent. "I read that you and she—" Isabella paused, her voice failing. "That you've met. Several times." Edward's face hardened. The mask of concern and patience began to crack. "Enough," he said, his voice low but charged with menace. "Enough of this ridiculous paranoia. You want to believe I'm a cheater? Fine, believe it. Live in your pathetic fantasy, but don't expect me to stand here being accused. In my own home." He turned to leave, but Isabella stepped forward, partially blocking his path. "I'm not letting you run from this conversation, Edward. Get out of the way, Isabella. Not until you admit the truth." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The air seemed to grow heavier, denser. Edward looked at her with an expression Isabella had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, emptier. It was contempt. "You want the truth?" His voice came out in a harsh whisper. "The truth is that I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending this marriage is what I wanted. I'm tired of pretending you're enough. I'm tired of living in this golden cage your father bought for us." The words hit Isabella like an avalanche. She staggered backward, her hands still on her belly, her eyes finally filling with tears. "Edward, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Vanessa understands me in a way you never will. She doesn't judge me. She doesn't pressure me. She just accepts me." Isabella felt the floor disappear from under her feet. Years of marriage, months of pregnancy, a whole life planned together, all crumbling in a matter of minutes. "You cheated on me." The statement came out like a lament. Edward didn't answer immediately. He just watched her, as if calculating his next move. "I did what I had to do to not go insane in this suffocating relationship." "And the baby?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking. "What about our child?" "The child will always be mine," Edward answered, with a coldness that made Isabella's blood run cold. "But you'll have to decide if you can handle reality, or if you're going to keep living in this fantasy where I'm the villain." He took a step forward, and this time, there was something threatening in his posture. Isabella retreated instinctively, her heel hitting the Persian rug that decorated the center of the room. "Be careful, Isabella. You wouldn't want to have an accident. Not in your condition." The threat was veiled but clear. Isabella felt fear tighten her chest. She had never been afraid of Edward before. Annoyance, sadness, frustration, yes. But fear was new and terrifying. "You're not going to intimidate me." "I'm not intimidating anyone. I'm just saying you need to be more careful. You're pregnant, emotional, unstable. Accidents happen." Isabella pressed the phone against her chest as if it were a shield. She needed to get out of that room. She needed to think. She needed to process everything that was happening. But when she tried to move toward the staircase, Edward blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" To the bedroom. I need space. Not until we resolve this. There's nothing to resolve, Edward. You admitted it. You're having an affair. Our marriage is over. The words came out with more force than Isabella expected. Edward blinked, surprised, and for a moment she saw something different in his eyes. Panic? Fear. But the expression vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that cold, calculated smile. Do you think your father will allow a divorce? Do you think Robert Thompson will let his daughter become a tabloid scandal? Think carefully, Isabella. You have nowhere to go. I have my family. Your family? Edward laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Your family adores me. Your father sees me as the perfect son-in-law. Your brother respects me. Who do you think they'll believe? You, the spoiled, emotional daughter? Or me, the responsible businessman who's taking care of you during your pregnancy? Isabella felt the room spin around. Her. He was right. Robert Thompson, her father, was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. A ruthless tycoon who valued reputation above all else. Edward had carefully cultivated his image with the Thompson family over the past 3 years. He was the ideal son-in-law. Charming, ambitious, polite. Robert trusted him. He even delegated important responsibilities to him in the family company. If she accused Edward without concrete proof, who would believe her? The messages could be dismissed as misunderstandings, and she knew Edward was skilled at manipulating narratives. I'll tell my father. Go ahead, Edward shrugged. Let's see how that turns out. But know this, if you do, you'll regret it. Your father has a lot to lose from a scandal. The company, the reputation, the deals. Do you really think he'll risk all of that because of your paranoid assumptions? They're not assumptions. They're facts. Edward approached slowly, his steps measured and deliberate. Isabella backed away until her back touched the cold wall. He stopped just inches from her, completely invading her personal space. Facts are what I say they are. And at the end of the day, Isabella, you know I always get what I want. Always. His tone was low, almost a whisper, but loaded with an absolute certainty that made Isabella tremble. She looked at the man in front of her and barely recognized him. Where was the Edward who had courted her with flowers and poetry? The Edward who promised to love her forever? Where was the man she had fallen in love with? Or had that man never existed? Had it all just been a carefully constructed mask? I won't let you destroy our family, Isabella said, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. Our child deserves a real home. Our child will have a home, and a mother who knows how to behave. Before Isabella could respond, her cell phone began to ring. The shrill tone broke the tension of the moment. She looked at the screen. It was her father. Robert Thompson rarely called so late. Something had to be wrong. Edward saw the name on the screen and stepped back, his expression instantly shifting to a convincing mask of concern. You'd better answer that. We don't want your father to worry, do we? Isabella hesitated for a second before answering. Dad? Isabella, honey. Robert's voice sounded tired. Sorry to call so late. I couldn't get a hold of Edward today. Is he around? Isabella looked at her husband, who had already resumed his relaxed posture by the bar. Yes, he is. Do you want to speak with him? Please. She handed the phone to Edward, who took it with a friendly smile. Robert, how are you? Yes, everything's great here. Isabella? She's fine, just a little tired. You know how pregnancy is. Tomorrow at 9? Perfect, I'll be there. Of course, you can count on me. Good night, Robert. He hung up and handed the phone back to Isabella. The shift in his posture, tone, and expression had been so quick and flawless that she felt a chill run down her spine. Edward was a consummate actor, and she had been his audience for years without realizing it. Your father wants to meet me early tomorrow. Business, Edward said casually, pouring himself more whiskey. You should get some rest. All this stress isn't good for the baby. The hypocrisy was so thick, Isabella had to bite her lip to keep from screaming. But she knew any reaction would only be used against her. Edward was carefully constructing his narrative. the unstable, paranoid, hormonal wife, and he, the patient, concerned husband. "I'm going upstairs." "Good idea. Rest well. We'll talk more calmly tomorrow when you're more rational." Isabella didn't reply. She just turned and walked toward the staircase, each step as heavy as lead. When she reached the first step, she heard Edward's voice behind her. "Isabella?" She stopped but didn't turn around. "I wasn't lying about one thing. Our child will always be mine. Remember that." Isabella continued up the stairs without looking back. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to lean on the banister. When she finally reached the bedroom, she closed the door behind her and slid to the floor, hugging her knees and allowing the tears to finally fall. She was trapped. Trapped in a marriage that had turned out to be a lie. Trapped by her family's reputation. Trapped by the child she carried in her womb. And worst of all, trapped by the fear of not being believed. But as she wept silently on the cold bedroom floor, a determination began to grow inside her. Edward might have fooled her. He might have manipulated everyone around him. But she wasn't going to give up. She wouldn't let him destroy her child with his lies. Somehow she would find a way to expose the truth. Somehow she would prove who Edward Miller really was. Not for her family, not for the reputation, but for the baby growing inside her who deserved a better future than the one Edward was offering. The night dragged on, long and silent, as Isabella remained on the bedroom floor, making plans and gathering strength for the battle she knew was to come. The morning arrived with an offensive brightness. Isabella awoke on the bedroom floor, her body aching and her mind still foggy. For a few blessed seconds she remembered nothing. Then it all came back in an avalanche of memories. The messages, the argument, Edward's veiled threats, the devastating realization that her marriage had been a lie from the start. She stood up with difficulty, feeling the weight of her belly pulling on her already sore back. In the bathroom mirror, she saw a version of herself she barely recognized. Swollen eyes, pale face, disheveled hair. She looked like a stranger inhabiting her own body. The sound of running water downstairs indicated that Edward was already awake, probably getting ready for the meeting with her father, the meeting where he would continue his performance as the perfect son-in-law and competent businessman. The thought made Isabella's stomach turn. She took a quick shower, trying to organize her thoughts. She needed a plan. She couldn't just accuse Edward without solid evidence. He had already made it clear he would twist any accusation, turning her into the paranoid villain of the story. She had to be smarter, more careful. When she went down to the kitchen, Edward was already at the table, drinking coffee and reading the news on his tablet. He was impeccable, as always. Navy blue suit, perfectly styled hair, and expensive fragrance in the air. The picture of perfection. "Good morning," he said without looking up. "There's fresh coffee, and I set out your vitamins. The doctor said you can't forget to take them." The performative concern was so rehearsed that Isabella almost felt sick, but she swallowed her revulsion and forced a nod. "Thank you." She poured herself some juice and got some toast, but her throat felt too tight to swallow anything. Edward finally looked up at her, his eyes scanning her face with an analytical expression. "Did you sleep well?" Isabella knew the question was a trap. If she said no, he would use it as evidence of her emotional instability. If she said yes, she would be blatantly lying. "Enough." Edward nodded, satisfied with the neutral response. "Good, because we need to talk about last night calmly, rationally." Isabella gripped the juice glass. "There's nothing to talk about, Edward. You admitted you're cheating." "I didn't admit to cheating. I admitted to frustration. There's a huge difference." His voice was calm, almost professorial. "Isabella, every relationship goes through difficult phases, especially during, say, a pregnancy. Your hormones are out of whack, you're sensitive, and I perhaps haven't been as understanding as I should have been." The manipulation was so subtle that if Isabella hadn't been on high alert, she might have believed him. He was rewriting the narrative of the previous night, turning an admission of infidelity into a simple marital disagreement. "Edward, I read the messages. They weren't ambiguous." Messages can be misinterpreted, especially when read out of context. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. But let's assume just for a moment that you're right, that I've developed some kind of inappropriate emotional connection with a co-worker. What do you plan to do? Destroy our family over it? Deprive our child of a stable home? The guilt-tripping was so swift, it left Isabella stunned. Somehow, he had turned his betrayal into her problem, as if she were the one being selfish for not accepting being deceived. Our child deserves to grow up in an honest family. Our child deserves to grow up in a united family. Edward stood up, walking around the table and approaching her. Isabella instinctively moved away, but he kept advancing until he was beside her. Think about it, Isabella. Your father built an empire based on reputation, a divorce scandal in the papers, accusations of infidelity. That would affect not just us, but the entire Thompson family, the business, the partnerships, everything. He was right, and they both knew it. Robert Thompson was obsessed with public image. Any family scandal would be seen as a personal failure. And Edward had skillfully made himself an integral part of the family business in recent years. Her father trusted him, depended on him. You're blackmailing me. I'm protecting you from yourself. Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, and Isabella had to suppress the urge to shrug it off violently. Let's do this. I promise to be more transparent, more present, and you promise to work on this insecurity, this tendency to create drama where there is none. We can fix this, Isabella. For us, for the baby. The proposal sounded almost reasonable, almost, but Isabella saw beyond the well-chosen words, saw the calculation behind his eyes, the careful manipulation, the way he was building a narrative where she was the problem, not him. I need to think. Of course. Edward smiled, removing his hand. Take all the time you need. But in the meantime, let's keep up appearances, especially today with the meeting at your father's office. We don't want to worry him with domestic issues, right? Before Isabella could answer, Edward's phone rang. He answered quickly, his expression shifting to a professional mask. Robert, good morning. Yes, I'm just leaving now. 20 minutes, perfect. He hung up and grabbed the leather briefcase that was on the sideboard. Your father is eager to discuss the new acquisition. Looks like we're finally expanding into the international market. He kissed the top of Isabella's head mechanically. See you later. Rest. Take care of yourself. Take care of our child. And then he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of his carefully chosen words and the scent of his expensive cologne. Isabella sat for long minutes after he left, her mind working furiously. She needed proof, concrete proof that not even Edward could twist or manipulate. The messages she had read were on his phone, and now that he was on alert, he had probably already deleted them. But maybe there was other evidence, bank statements, emails, call logs. She just needed to know where to look. Finishing her toast without appetite, Isabella went up to Edward's office. It was a room he kept locked, claiming it contained confidential company documents. But Isabella knew where he kept the spare key. She had discovered it by accident months ago while looking for office supplies. With trembling hands, she retrieved the key from inside a book in the library and opened the office door. The room was meticulously organized. Mahogany desk, bookshelf, labeled files, everything in its place, everything perfect, just how Edward liked it. She started with the desk. The drawers were filled with contracts, financial reports, business proposals. Nothing personal, nothing incriminating. Edward was too careful to leave obvious evidence. But then, at the back of the third drawer, hidden under a pile of old documents, Isabella found something. An unlabeled folder. Inside were bank statements from an account she didn't recognize. An account solely in Edward's name opened 2 years ago. She flipped through the papers, her heart racing with each page. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to hotels, jewelry stores, expensive restaurants, dates that coincided with supposed business trips, trips where Edward claimed to be in meetings all day. But they weren't business trips, they were rendezvous with Vanessa. Isabella photographed every page with her phone, her hands shaking so much that some pictures came out blurry. But she got enough records, proof that Edward was spending significant amounts of money on another relationship. Continuing her search, she found more. Printed emails, carefully hidden in an envelope at the back of a file cabinet. Conversations between Edward and Vanessa that were unequivocally romantic. Declarations of love, future plans, discussions about leaving their respective spouses. He wasn't just having an affair, he was planning a whole life with someone else. While Isabella carried his child, trusted him, built a future together, Edward was secretly building a different future, with another woman. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, that Isabella felt her legs give way. She sat down in the office chair, clutching the envelope to her chest, silent tears streaming down her face. But along with the pain, something else began to grow. Anger. A deep, burning anger that grew stronger with every second. Edward thought he was smart. He thought he could manipulate her, control her, make her doubt her own sanity. But he had underestimated one thing. Isabella Thompson was not weak. She had grown up watching her father build an empire from scratch. She had learned that in life, as in business, information was power. And now she had information. She had proof. She photographed all the documents, put them carefully back in their places, and locked the office. Back in her room, she uploaded all the photos to the cloud, creating backups in multiple places. Edward could try to erase the evidence, but now it was safe, untouchable. The next step was to decide what to do with this information. Confronting Edward directly would be useless. He had already demonstrated his ability to distort the truth. She needed a different strategy. Then Isabella thought of her father. Robert Thompson was many things, a tough, demanding, sometimes distant man, but he loved his daughter, and more importantly, he valued honesty and loyalty above all else. Edward had betrayed not only Isabella but also the trust Robert had placed in him, but revealing everything to her father had risks. There was the issue of public reputation, the scandal, the business. Edward had built his defense around these fears, and he was right to do so. Robert might choose to cover up the affair to protect the family's image. Isabella needed to think carefully about how to present the evidence. She needed to ensure her father would see Edward for what he truly was, a manipulator, a liar, a man who didn't deserve the trust that had been placed in him. She spent the rest of the morning planning, weighing options, considering consequences. It was late afternoon when she finally picked up the phone and called her brother, Raphael Thompson. Raphael was 5 years older and worked as a corporate security consultant. He had experience in investigations, in uncovering hidden truths. If anyone could help her build a solid case against Edward, it was him. "Raph, can you come over? I need to talk to you, it's urgent." His voice sounded concerned. "Isabella, what happened? Is everything okay with the baby?" "The baby's fine, but I need your help, please. Don't say anything to Dad yet." There was a pause. "I'll be there in half an hour." Isabella hung up and took a deep breath. This was the first real step, the first move toward the truth. She was scared, but also determined. Edward had built his house of lies carefully, but every house, no matter how well constructed, had its weaknesses, its cracks, and Isabella was about to find every single one of them. When Raphael arrived, he found his sister on the back porch, looking out at the impeccable gardens. He hugged her, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "What's going on, Bella?" Isabella turned to him, and Raphael saw something in her eyes that alarmed him. It wasn't just sadness, it was determination. A cold, hard resolve that he recognized. It was the same expression their father had when making difficult business decisions. "Edward is cheating on me, and I have proof." She handed her phone to Raphael, showing him the pictures she had taken. He scrolled through the images in silence, his expression growing darker and darker. "That son of a bitch." "There's more." She told him about the messages, the argument from the night before, the veiled threats. As she spoke, Raphael's anger grew visibly. His hands tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. "I'm going to kill him." "No." Isabella placed a hand on her brother's arm. "That's not how we're going to do this. I need your help, Raph. I need to build a case so solid that not even Edward can manipulate it. Need more information. About him, about this Vanessa, about everything. Raphael looked at her for a long moment before nodding. I'll investigate, discreetly. Edward won't even suspect a thing. But Isabella, you have to promise me one thing. What? Don't be alone with him. Not until we understand exactly who we're dealing with. Men like Edward, when they're cornered, can become dangerous. Isabella thought of the veiled threats from the previous night, the cold look in Edward's eyes. Her brother was right. I promise. And one more thing. Raphael held her face in his hands. You're not alone in this. I'm here. And when Dad finds out, he'll be here too. Edward made a gigantic mistake underestimating the Thompson family. Isabella nodded, feeling tears threaten to fall again. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were of relief. She wasn't alone. She had her brother by her side. And soon she would have the whole truth. Edward Miller had built his house of lies on a foundation of manipulation and deceit. But that foundation was about to crack. And when it cracked, the whole structure would come crashing down. Isabella just needed to be patient, strategic, and above. All strong, for the baby she carried, for herself, and for all the other people Edward had deceived over the years. The war had begun, and Isabella Thompson was determined to win. 3 days passed since Isabella had shared her discoveries with Raphael. 3 days of discreet investigation, of rising tension, of a superficial calm that hid the storm brewing beneath the surface. Edward continued his normal routines, seemingly unaware that his web of lies was being carefully dismantled. Isabella kept her promise to her brother. She avoided being alone with Edward, always arranging doctor's appointments, visits with friends, any plausible excuse. Edward seemed pleased with the distance, interpreting it as confirmation of his narrative that she was being dramatic and needed space to calm down. But on that Thursday afternoon, while Edward was at a supposed business meeting, Raphael arrived at the mansion with a thick folder and a grave expression. You need to see this. They sat in the living room, the curtains drawn to ensure privacy. Raphael opened the folder, revealing stacks of documents, photos, reports, the results of 72 hours of intensive investigation. I started with Vanessa, Raphael said, pulling out some photos. Vanessa Morgan, 28, works in the marketing department at Thompson Industries for 2 years. Divorced, no children, lives alone in an apartment in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Isabella looked at the photos. Vanessa was pretty, in a professional, polished way. Dark hair, confident smile, elegant clothes. The type of woman Edward always admired publicly while claiming Isabella was the only one for him. Do they meet? Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Regularly, every Tuesday and Thursday, at a hotel on the west side. Edward checks in under a fake name, pays in cash. But I got the security camera footage. Raphael paused. Isabella, how long has this been going on? It hasn't just been a few months, it's been almost 2 years. The shock was like a punch to the gut. 2 years. Edward had been with Vanessa since before their wedding, before he proposed, before he made all those promises of fidelity and eternal love. There's more, Raphael continued, his voice growing tenser. Edward is in serious financial trouble, gambling debts. He frequents underground casinos in Atlantic City. He's lost over $500,000 in the last 18 months. How is that possible? My father pays him an excellent salary, and we have our own joint account, which is practically empty. Raphael showed her the bank statements. Edward has been systematically siphoning money, small amounts you probably didn't notice. $100 here, $200 there. Over months, it adds up to a considerable sum. And there's more. He took out a life insurance policy in your name, $3 million. You're his beneficiary, but he is your sole beneficiary. Isabella felt her blood run cold. A life insurance policy, in her name, while she was pregnant, while he was in debt. The implications were terrifying. Raphael, do you think he would? I don't want to believe it, but a desperate man drowning in debt with a mistress waiting. Raphael didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of his words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Isabella instinctively placed a hand on her belly. The baby moved, a reminder of the life growing inside her. The life Edward claimed to want to protect, but which now seemed to represent another obstacle in his plans. There's something else. Raphael pulled out another set of documents. Edward forged your signature, multiple times, on bank contracts, on financial applications, on property transfers. He was slowly transferring assets from both your names to his alone. That's fraud, that's criminal, Raphael finished. Isabella, this goes far beyond marital betrayal. Edward has committed multiple felonies: fraud, forgery, embezzlement. If we take this to Dad, to the family lawyers, Edward could face serious consequences. Good. Isabella's voice came out colder than she expected. He deserves it. I agree. But there's a problem. Raphael hesitated. Some of these fraudulent transactions involve company funds. Edward used his position as Robert Thompson's son-in-law to gain the trust of investors and business partners. If this comes out publicly, it could damage the company's reputation. Exactly what Edward said would happen if you exposed him. So what do? We confront Dad. Today. Now. We show him all of this and let him decide how to proceed. But Isabella, you need to be prepared. This is going to destroy Edward. Professionally, personally, financially, there will be no coming back. Isabella looked at the documents spread out before her. Concrete proof of years of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Each page represented a choice Edward had made consciously, a deliberate decision to deceive her, use her, possibly even endanger her. I'm prepared. Let's go talk to my father. Raphael nodded and picked up his phone. The conversation was brief. Robert was in his private office and agreed to see them immediately, despite being in the middle of important meetings. Something in Raphael's tone must have alerted him that it was urgent. Robert Thompson's office occupied the top floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan's financial district. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a constant reminder of the empire he had built with determination and hard work. When Isabella and Raphael entered, Robert was standing by the window, hands in, his trouser pockets. He turned, and his shrewd gaze immediately caught the tension in his children. What happened? Raphael wasted no time. He opened the folder and began presenting the evidence, methodically, as if giving a business presentation. Bank statements, photos, recordings, forged documents. With each new revelation, Robert's face grew darker. Isabella remained silent for most of the presentation, letting the evidence speak for itself. But when Raphael got to the life insurance policy, she finally spoke. Dad, I'm scared. I'm scared of what Edward might do when he finds out we know all of this. I'm scared for my safety, for the baby's safety. Robert walked over to her and took her hands in his. His eyes, normally so controlled and calculating in business, were filled with a contained fury she had rarely seen. No one is going to hurt you. No one. I didn't let anything bad happen to you when you were a child, and I'm not about to start now. But Dad, you heard what Raphael said. If this goes public, it could affect the business, the family's reputation. I know how much that matters to you. Matters? Robert let out a harsh laugh. Isabella, you are my daughter. Do you think any business, any amount of money or reputation is worth more than your safety, than the life of my grandchild? But Edward said you would. Edward said a lot of lies, and I was foolish enough to believe him, to trust him, to bring him into my company, my family. Robert released Isabella's hands and began pacing the office, his mind clearly working at high speed. But that ends today, now. What are you going to do? Raphael asked. First, I'm going to ensure Isabella's safety. She's not going back to that house. Not until Edward is out of it. Second, I'm going to confront him with this evidence and give him a choice. Confess everything publicly, accept the legal consequences, and get out of our lives peacefully. Or fight, and I guarantee that every dirty piece of his life will be exposed. Every lie, every betrayal, every fraud. He'll choose to fight, Isabella said calmly. He's not the type of man to accept defeat. He'll try to manipulate, negotiate, turn the situation around. Then he will lose. Robert picked up his phone. I'm calling our lawyers, preparing a restraining order, and I'm going to speak personally with the investors and partners Edward deceived using my name. They deserve to know the truth. But the reputation will be affected, Robert admitted. But I'd rather face the truth head-on and deal with the consequences than let this man continue to harm my daughter and tarnish our family's name with his lies. The truth, Isabella, always comes out. The only choice we have is how we respond to it. Isabella felt tears burn her eyes. For months, she had carried the fear of not being believed, of not being supported. But here was her father, willing to risk his precious reputation, his meticulously built public image just to protect her. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me yet," Robert said, but his tone was softer. "This is going to be hard. It's going to be public. It's going to be painful. But in the end, you will come out of this stronger, and your child will grow up knowing they come from a family that values truth and justice above appearances." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers were summoned, documents were prepared. A security team was assigned to Isabella. Robert personally called every member of the company's board, informing them of the situation before it became public. Meanwhile, Raphael coordinated the collection of more evidence. He contacted Vanessa directly, and to his surprise, she agreed to talk. Apparently, Edward had made promises to her too. Promises to leave Isabella as soon as the baby was born, to marry her and build a life together. Vanessa, realizing she was as much a victim of Edward's manipulations as Isabella, agreed to cooperate with the investigation. By nightfall, everything was in place. Robert scheduled a meeting with Edward for 7 o'clock that evening in his office. Edward, suspecting nothing, confirmed his attendance, probably assuming it would be another discussion about business. Isabella was present when Edward arrived. He walked into the office with his confident smile, his relaxed posture of someone who believed he had everything under control. But when he saw Isabella, Raphael, and 2 lawyers sitting in a semicircle before Robert's desk, his expression changed. "What's going on here?" "Sit down, Edward," Robert said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "We need to talk." Edward looked around, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. He tried to maintain his composure, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands nervously clenched and unclenched. "If this is about Isabella and her paranoid accusations, I've already explained that she's just—" "This isn't about accusations," Robert interrupted him. "This is about facts." He slid the first folder across the desk. "Edward, you have been having an affair with Vanessa Morgan for 2 years. You have embezzled funds from the joint account you share with my daughter. You have accumulated gambling debts totaling over $500,000. You have forged Isabella's signature on multiple financial documents. And you took out a life insurance policy in her name without her knowledge or consent." With each accusation, Edward's face grew paler. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "And before you try to deny or manipulate the facts," Raphael added, "we have proof of everything. Bank statements, security footage, witnesses, forged documents with handwriting analysis, confirming the forgery. You're finished, Edward." Edward finally found his voice, but it came out hoarse, desperate. "Robert, you don't understand. I can explain all of this. I was just trying to—" "Trying to what?" Robert stood up, leaning his hands on the desk and leaning toward Edward. "Trying to steal from my daughter? Deceive her? Endanger her? You used my name, my trust, my family for your own selfish gains." "It wasn't like that." Edward also stood, his mask of calm finally cracking. "You don't know what it's like. Always being in the shadow, always being the son-in-law of the great Robert Thompson, never being enough, never being respected for my own merits." The truth was finally coming out. Years of resentment, envy, and bitterness pouring out in an angry confession. Isabella had everything: money, family, a name, respect. What did I have? Debts, pressure, impossible expectations. Vanessa saw me for who I really was. She didn't care about the Thompson name. She wanted me. "Then let her have you." Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice firm and cold. "But not without consequences. Not without everyone knowing exactly who you are, a liar, a manipulator, a cheat." Edward turned to her, and for the first time, Isabella felt no fear. She saw a pathetic, small, desperate man. A man who had lost everything because he chose lies over truth, greed over love. "You'll regret this, Isabella." "No," Robert said. "You will regret this. Because as of right now, you no longer have a job. You no longer have access to any Thompson family funds. You no longer have a place in my daughter's or my grandchild's life. And tomorrow morning, we go to the courts. Every fraud, every forgery, every lie will be exposed." Edward looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. For the first time, he was truly alone. No masks, no manipulations, just a man facing the consequences of his own choices. "You'll destroy the Thompson family's reputation with this," he tried one last time. "When this hits the news, the business will suffer." "Leave the business to me," Robert replied. "I built this empire once. I can do it again if I have to, but I will not sacrifice my daughter and my grandchild to protect a liar." The words fell in the room like a final sentence. Edward realized he had lost, completely, irrevocably. He looked at Isabella one last time, and she saw something in his eyes that could have been regret, or maybe just self-pity. "I hope you'll be happy, Isabella. You and your precious baby." "We will be," Isabella replied, "without you." Edward left the room, his posture defeated, his steps heavy. The lawyers followed him, ensuring the restraining order was served immediately. Raphael went with them, overseeing the process. Alone with her father, Isabella finally allowed the tears to fall. Robert hugged her, holding her as she cried out years of pain, betrayal, and fear. "It's over, my daughter. It's over." And as Isabella wept in her father's arms, she felt something more than just pain. She felt relief, freedom, and for the first time in months hoped that maybe, just maybe, a better future was possible. The first rays of sun pierced through the curtains of the guest room at the Thompson house. Isabella woke slowly, taking a few seconds to orient herself. She was no longer in the mansion she had shared with Edward. She was back in her childhood home, in the room that had been hers throughout her teenage years. The walls were still the same soft lavender color she had chosen at 15, the same framed photos of happy family moments, the same comforting smell of home. A week had passed since the confrontation in her father's office. A week that felt like it had lasted for years. Isabella sat up in bed carefully, feeling the weight of her belly pull at her back. The baby was active in the morning, moving and kicking, oblivious to the drama that had consumed its mother in recent weeks. Mother. The thought was still strange and wonderful at the same time. In just 2 months she would have a child, a whole new life to care for, protect, love. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother, Margaret Thompson, entered balancing a breakfast tray. "Good morning, my dear. I thought you might like to eat in your room today." Her voice was soft, filled with a maternal concern Isabella hadn't noticed in years. Since marrying Edward, her visits to her parents' house had become less frequent, more formal. Edward always found excuses not to attend family gatherings, and gradually Isabella had started to distance herself too. Now she realized that was part of Edward's control, isolating her from her support network, making her dependent only on him. "Thank you, Mom." Margaret placed the tray on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the mattress, taking Isabella's hand in hers. "How are you feeling? Truly?" Isabella thought about the question. How was she feeling? It was a complex mix of emotions: relief to be away from Edward, anger at the betrayal, fear for the future, sadness for the marriage that never really existed. But above all, there was a growing sense of peace, of being finally in the right place. "I'm better. I don't think I've processed everything yet, but I'm better." "Your father told me about the evidence Raphael found." Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. "Isabella, you were so brave. Many women would have stayed, silent, afraid of the consequences." "I almost did," Isabella admitted. "Edward made me feel like it was my fault, that I was being paranoid, dramatic. If it weren't for Raphael, I don't know if I would have had the courage to confront the situation." "But you did, and that's what matters." Margaret squeezed her hand. Your father is proud of you. I'm proud of you. And your child will grow up knowing they have a strong, courageous mother. The words touched Isabella deeply. For so long she had felt weak, manipulated, small, but maybe she was stronger than she thought. Strong enough to seek the truth. Strong enough to confront her husband and her family with painful facts. Strong enough to start over. What's going to happen now? With Edward? Your father and the lawyers are handling it, Margaret said. Apparently Edward tried to negotiate, but Robert was adamant. All formal charges have been filed. Fraud, document forgery, embezzlement. The lawyers say it's a solid case. And the company? The family's reputation? Margaret sighed. I won't lie, there's damage. Some business partners are concerned. The press is starting to ask questions. But your father is handling it the way he knows best, with transparency and strength. He's meeting personally with every stakeholder, explaining the situation, showing them the evidence that we were deceived as much as they were. Isabella felt guilt gnaw at her stomach. Guilt for causing trouble for the family business. Guilt for not seeing through Edward's lies sooner. Margaret must have noticed her daughter's expression because she gently lifted Isabella's chin. No, don't do that. Don't blame yourself for what he did. Edward made his choices. He lied, cheated, manipulated. That is not your fault. And as for the business, well, your father built this empire with honesty and hard work. A scandal isn't going to bring it down. If anything, it will show the true character of the Thompson family, that we don't tolerate lies or betrayal, even when it comes from within. Isabella nodded, blinking back tears. Her mother was right. She wasn't responsible for Edward's actions. The breakfast was simple but delicious. Still warm French bread, fresh cheese, sliced fruit, orange juice. Isabella ate with an appetite she hadn't felt in weeks. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, allowing her to finally breathe, feel, live again. After breakfast, she took a long shower and dressed in comfortable clothes. When she went down to the living room, she found Raphael working on his laptop, surrounded by papers and documents. Still investigating? Always. Raphael smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. Isabella, there's something I need to show you. He turned the laptop so she could see the screen. It was an online news report, not yet published, but set to be released the next day. The headline was sensational, but accurate. Thompson heiress exposes husband's betrayal and fraud. Scandal rocks New York elite. It's going to be public, Isabella murmured. It is, Raphael confirmed. But Dad is prepared. He's giving an exclusive interview to the city's most respected newspaper, presenting his side of the story before it gets distorted. And here's the best part. He closed the news report tab and opened another. Vanessa is going to talk too. Vanessa's photo appeared on the screen, but she looked very different from the pictures Isabella had seen before. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, the expression of someone who had been through a private hell. She reached out to me last night, Raphael explained. She's willing to testify against Edward. Apparently he lied to her too. Promised he was getting a divorce, that he was just waiting for the baby to be born, so as not to stress you during the pregnancy. Said he loved you only as the mother of his child, but that the true love of his life was her. So he manipulated both of us. Exactly. And when Vanessa found out about the gambling debts, the forged documents, the life insurance policy, she realized she was being used just as much as you were. Raphael paused. She's scared, Isabella. Scared Edward will blame her for everything. That's why she wants to cooperate fully with the investigation. I understand her, Isabella said, and she meant it. A few months ago, she would have hated Vanessa, seen her as the villain who destroyed her marriage. But now, she saw the truth. Vanessa was another victim of Edward's manipulations, another woman he had used for his own selfish ends. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The story spread through the media like wildfire. Photos of Isabella and Edward together at social events were republished with sensational headlines. Speculation arose about the future of Thompson Industries. Gossip, Columnists debated who was to blame. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. Other women began to come forward. Women Edward had manipulated in the past. An ex-girlfriend from college whom he had isolated from her friends and family. A co-worker he had harassed before meeting Isabella. Each story painted a clear pattern. Edward wasn't just a man who made a mistake. He was a serial manipulator, someone who systematically exploited the vulnerabilities of the women around him. With each new testimony, the narrative shifted. Isabella was no longer seen as the spoiled heiress who caused a family scandal. She was a survivor, a brave woman who stood up to a man who had manipulated and deceived her. Letters of support began to arrive, from strangers, from organizations that help victims of toxic relationships, even from other women in similar situations who found courage in Isabella's story. Robert Thompson, true to his word, remained firm and transparent. He met personally with every concerned investor, showing them the evidence of Edward's fraud and ensuring that measures were being taken to prevent anything similar from happening again. Surprisingly, most business partners not only stayed, but increased their respect for the Thompson family. After all, Robert could have covered up the scandal, protected Edward to save face, but he chose the truth even when it hurt. As for Edward, things were not going well for him. With the evidence presented and the multiple testimonies, his lawyers advised a plea deal. He signed all divorce papers without contest. He renounced any right to joint properties. He agreed to a permanent restraining order that prevented him from contacting Isabella or the baby when it was born. But most importantly, he formally confessed to the fraud and forgeries. In return, the prosecutors agreed to recommend a reduced sentence, though he still faced considerable time in prison. The last time Isabella saw Edward was during a virtual hearing. He was on the other side of the screen, wearing simple clothes, a far cry from the expensive suits he used to wear. He looked older, tired, defeated. When it was his turn to speak, he looked directly at the camera, directly at Isabella. "I'm sorry." Those were his first words, and they sounded genuine, at least in that moment. "I ruined everything. Out of greed, out of pride, out of stupidity. You deserved better, Isabella. You always did." Isabella didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Apologies didn't change the past. They didn't erase months of manipulation and lies. They didn't return the lost time or the broken trust. But she nodded, a single nod that indicated she had heard him. And then she disconnected, closing that chapter of her life forever. The weeks passed, and slowly, life began to find a new rhythm. Isabella started regular therapy with a specialist in relational trauma. The sessions were difficult, forcing her to confront not only Edward's betrayal, but also her own vulnerabilities and the patterns that had made her a target for manipulation. She learned about gaslighting, about coercive control, about the subtle tactics manipulators use to undermine their victims' confidence. She learned that being deceived didn't make her weak. It made her human, and surviving, confronting, winning, that made her strong. Raphael became her constant shadow, always present, always protective, but never suffocating. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, helped prepare the baby's room, and simply sat with her in silence when that was what she needed. Her mother, Margaret, proved to be a source of wisdom and comfort. She shared stories of her own challenges in marriage, the pressures of being the wife of a powerful man like Robert, the times she had to choose between peace and authenticity. Isabella realized she didn't know her mother as well as she thought. There were depths there, strength and resilience she had never noticed. And her father, Robert, surprised her in ways she hadn't expected. A man she had always seen as distant, focused only on business, revealed himself to be deeply caring. He cancelled meetings to have dinner with the family. He spent hours helping assemble the crib despite admitting he had no manual skills whatsoever. He spoke enthusiastically about his coming grandchild, making plans to teach them about business, take them on trips, share everything he had learned in life. On one particularly quiet evening, Isabella and Robert sat on the porch, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The air was cool, scented with jasmine from the garden. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Why didn't you hesitate? When Raphael showed you the evidence, when you had to choose between protecting the company's reputation and protecting me, you didn't even hesitate. Why? Robert was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. When you were little, you used to have nightmares. You'd wake up screaming and I'd run to your room. Your mother always got there first, of course. She was always better with the emotional stuff, but I would stand there too in the doorway just watching. And every time I'd think, this is my daughter. It's my job to protect her, not just physically, but from all the fears, all the bad things in the world. He paused, looking up at the stars. As you got older, it became harder to protect you. You made your own decisions, chose your own path. And when you chose Edward, I tried to trust your judgment. I tried to believe he would be good for you. But deep down, something always bothered me about him, an instinct that he wasn't sincere. Why didn't you say anything? Because you seemed happy, and I thought maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just my overprotective fatherly instinct. Robert turned to look at her directly. But when Raphael showed me that evidence, everything became clear, and there was no hesitation because the choice was obvious. You are my daughter, my blood, my family. No business, no reputation, no amount of money is worth more than that. It never was, it never will be. Isabella felt tears stream down her face. She stood up with some difficulty due to her belly and hugged her father. Robert held her tight, just like he used to when she was a child, and the world seemed too big and scary. I love you, Dad. I love you too, my daughter. Always have, always will. Time continued its inexorable march. Isabella's belly grew, making simple movements more challenging. She laughed at herself, trying to tie her shoes or get up from the sofa. Without help. The baby was active, constantly moving and kicking, especially at night. Isabella had decided not to find out the baby's gender during the pregnancy, wanting the surprise. But now, as the due date approached, she found herself wondering. A boy? A girl? What would the baby's face look like? Would they have her eyes, her mother's smile, her father's determination? One thing she knew for sure. This baby would be loved. Deeply, unconditionally loved. By her, by her parents, by Raphael, by the entire Thompson family. And they would grow up knowing they came from a line of strong, honest people who valued truth and family above all else. 3 weeks before her due date, Isabella woke up in the middle of the night with a strange sensation. It wasn't pain exactly, but a different kind of pressure. She sat up in bed, confused, trying to understand what was happening. Then she felt it, a warm gush of liquid. Her heart pounded, her water had broken. "Mom!" she called, trying to stay calm. "Mom!" Margaret came running, followed closely by Robert and Raphael. One look was enough for them to understand. "It's time," Margaret said, already shifting into action mode. "Raphael, get the bag we packed. Robert, call the doctor. Isabella, breathe, just breathe." The drive to the hospital was a blur. The contractions had started, still spaced out but definitely present. Isabella squeezed her mother's hand in the back seat of the car, breathing through the pain. At the hospital, everything happened both quickly and slowly at the same time. Hours dragged on as the contractions grew closer, more intense. Margaret stayed by Isabella's side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, reminding her to breathe. Robert and Raphael waited outside, nervous. Robert paced back and forth, checking his phone obsessively, as if he could speed up the process. Raphael tried to look calm, but his hands trembled slightly as he drank his coffee. Finally, after 14 hours of labor, Isabella heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A cry, strong, indignant, perfect. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the baby on Isabella's chest. A beautiful baby girl. Isabella looked at the tiny being in her arms and felt her heart explode with love. The baby had big, curious eyes, already trying to focus on her mother's face. Tiny fingers clenched and unclenched. Soft, dark hair covered her head. "Hi," Isabella whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. "Hi, my princess. I'm your mommy, and I love you so much. So much." The baby seemed to calm at the sound of her voice, the voice she had been listening to for months from inside the womb. Margaret was openly crying, gently touching the baby's head. "She's perfect, Isabella. Absolutely perfect. When Robert and Raphael were finally allowed in, they both stopped at the door, momentarily speechless. Robert approached slowly, reverently, as if approaching something sacred. "My God," he whispered, looking at his granddaughter. She's perfect," Raphael completed, his own voice thick with emotion. "She's perfect. Do you want to hold her?" With extreme care, Isabella passed the baby to Robert. The powerful businessman, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billions, held the tiny life with trembling hands, fear evident in his eyes. "Hi, little one," he murmured. "I'm your grandpa, and I promise I will always protect you. I will give you the world. I will teach you everything I know, and I will love you every day of your life." The baby yawned, completely oblivious to the profound declaration she had just received. The room filled with soft laughter. "What are you going to name her?" Margaret asked. Isabella had thought about it a lot. For months, she had considered different names, testing how they sounded, imagining calling them out loud for a lifetime. But she always came back to one in particular, a name that meant exactly what she needed in this moment of her life. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." The name fell upon the room like a blessing. Hope. After so much darkness, manipulation, and pain, this little life represented exactly that. Hope for a better future. Hope for true and unconditional love. Hope for new beginnings and second chances. "It's perfect," Robert said, carefully passing the baby to Raphael, who held her as if she were made of glass. Hope Thompson. The first few days with Hope were simultaneously the most exhausting and the most rewarding of Isabella's life. 3 a.m. feedings, endless diapers, inconsolable cries that mysteriously stopped when she sang softly, but also smiles that melted her heart, tiny fingers that curled around hers, eyes that followed her around the room, recognizing her as Mommy. Margaret was an inexhaustible source of help and wisdom, sharing decades of experience as a mother. Robert visited every day after work, always with a new and completely unnecessary gift. Raphael took on the role of protective uncle with seriousness, checking doors and windows, making sure everything was safe. The family had come together in a way Isabella had never experienced before. The tragedy of her marriage to Edward had, paradoxically, brought everyone closer. It had opened lines of communication that had been closed for years. It had forced honest and vulnerable conversations that would have never happened otherwise. A month after Hope's birth, Isabella received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a letter. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Edward. For a moment, she considered tearing it up without reading, but curiosity won. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The letter was short, handwritten in a script that revealed the haste and emotion of its writer. "Isabella, I know I have no right to write to you. I know you will probably hate receiving this letter. But there are things I need to say, even knowing they won't change anything. I ruined everything. There is no excuse that justifies what I did. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. It was all my choice. You did nothing to deserve it. Nothing. I've spent months trying to understand why I did what I did. Envy, maybe. Insecurity, certainly. You came from a powerful family, and I always felt small next to that. So I tried to compensate in all the wrong ways. I tried to control you because I couldn't control my own inadequacies. Vanessa wasn't real. Whatever I thought I felt for her was just an escape from the reality I had created for myself. And the debts were a pathetic attempt to prove something, maybe to myself, that I was more than just Robert Thompson's son-in-law. But in the process of trying to prove I was someone, I became no one. I lost the only person who genuinely loved me. I lost the chance to know my child. I lost everything that mattered. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm writing because you deserve to know that none of this was your fault. You were an incredible wife, an incredible person, and I simply wasn't man enough to recognize that. I hope you'll be happy, Isabella, truly happy. I hope your child grows up surrounded by love and honesty. I hope you find someone who sees you for who you really are, amazing, and treats you with the respect you always deserved. Goodbye, Isabella. Take care of yourself. Take care of him." Edward Isabella read the letter twice before carefully folding it and putting it away in a drawer. She didn't know if the words were genuine or just another manipulation. Honestly, it didn't matter anymore. Edward was the past, a closed chapter of her life. What mattered now was the future, and the future looked bright. Spring arrived, in New York City, bringing with it flowers in the gardens and a lighter air. Hope was growing fast, each day revealing more of her personality. She was curious, always observing everything around her with big, attentive eyes. She had Margaret's smile and Robert's determination in her eyes. Isabella had resumed her own activities. She started art classes, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage. She joined a support group for survivors of manipulative relationships, sharing her story and listening to others. Each session strengthened her, reminding her that she wasn't alone, that her experience, however painful, could help other people. On a Saturday afternoon, the Thompson family hosted a barbecue in the garden. Hope, now 3 months old, was in a playpen, playing with colorful toys. Robert presided over the grill with exaggerated seriousness, insisting he had a specific method that guaranteed the perfect steak. Margaret arranged salads, laughing at her husband's dramatic declarations. Raphael had brought a new girlfriend, an architect named Camilla, who immediately fell in love with Hope. Isabella sat in a comfortable chair watching the scene. Her heart was full, not in a perfect, problem-free way, but in a real, authentic way. There were scars, yes, painful memories she would probably always carry, but there was also love, support, family, hope. "Auntie," a childish voice called. The 6-year-old daughter of a distant cousin ran toward her. "Can I play with Hope?" "Of course, sweetie, but be gentle, she's still very small." The little girl nodded solemnly and knelt beside the playpen, making funny faces to make Hope laugh. The sound of the baby's laughter filled the garden, mingling with lively conversations, the sizzle of meat on the grill and soft music playing in the background. This was what Isabella had missed during her years with Edward. Simple moments of family connection, genuine laughter, the freedom to be herself without fear of judgment or manipulation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Robert came over and sat beside Isabella. "Are you happy, my daughter?" Isabella looked at Hope, at her mother laughing with Camilla, at Raphael clowning around to entertain the children, at the whole scene of chaotic, beautiful normalcy. "Yes, Dad, I'm happy. Finally." Robert nodded, satisfied. "That's all I've ever wanted for you. Just happiness. Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for showing me what a real family means. Always, Isabella, always." Months continued to pass, each bringing new milestones. Hope's first intentional smile, first word-like sounds, first tooth emerging, causing sleepless nights but filling everyone with silly pride. Isabella was changing too. The woman who had been manipulated and controlled was transforming into someone stronger, more confident. She started working with the family company, not out of obligation, but because she was genuinely interested. Robert was surprised and delighted by her innovative ideas, her fresh perspective on old business. Together, father and daughter began to implement changes in the company's corporate culture, stronger anti-harassment policies, support programs for employees in difficult domestic situations, training on recognizing and preventing manipulation in the workplace. Isabella's experience with Edward, as painful as it had been, was helping to create a safer work environment for hundreds of people. Her story, which she shared selectively but honestly, inspired others to speak up, to seek help, to not tolerate abuse. Hope's first birthday arrived in a whirlwind of emotions. Isabella couldn't believe a year had already passed since that day in the hospital, since the moment she held her daughter, for the first time, and felt her world completely change. The party was intimate, just close family and a few select friends. Hope, in an adorable pink dress chosen by Margaret, was the center of attention. She had started taking her first hesitant steps the week before, and everyone eagerly awaited to see her walk. When they brought out the cake, a simple but beautiful flower-themed confection, Hope's eyes widened. She clapped her hands excitedly, making everyone laugh. As they sang "Happy Birthday," Isabella held her daughter in her lap, looking at the face illuminated by the glow of the candles. A year ago she was at rock bottom, betrayed, manipulated, fearing for the future. Now she was surrounded by love, holding the light of her life in her arms, part of a strong, united family. Hope blew out the candles with help, and everyone applauded. The baby laughed, that perfect gurgling laugh that never failed to melt hearts. Later that night, after the guests had left and Hope was asleep in her crib, Isabella sat in the darkened room, just watching her daughter sleep. The soft, regular breathing, the small, relaxed hands, the angelic face in total, peaceful sleep. "I promise," Isabella whispered. "I promise you will grow up knowing what true love is. I promise I will never let anyone make you feel small or worthless. I promise to teach you to be strong, confident, honest. I promise you will always have a family that supports you, that loves you unconditionally." She paused, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "And I promise that the story of what happened to your mother will never define you. It doesn't define who you are. It's just part of the journey that brought us here. And here, my darling, is a beautiful place." Hope sighed softly in her sleep as if in agreement. Isabella stood up and walked to the window. New York City stretched out before her, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere in that vastness, Edward was serving his sentence, dealing with the consequences of his choices. She didn't feel anger for him anymore. She felt nothing but an empty distance. He was a lesson learned, nothing more. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. Isabella didn't know exactly what would come. Maybe she would meet someone new someday, someone who would treat her with the respect and love she deserved. Maybe she would remain single, focusing on Hope and her career. Both options were fine, because for the first time in years, she was in control of her own life. The journey had been painful. It had revealed things about herself she would rather not have known. It had forced confrontations she had tried to avoid, but it had also revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed. It had united her family in unexpected ways. It had given her a beautiful daughter who brought joy to every day. And if she could go back in time, would she change anything? Isabella thought about it. The answer was complicated. Would she wish she hadn't gone through the pain? Of course. Would she wish she hadn't been betrayed and manipulated? Obviously. But would she change the final outcome, this moment, this life she had built from the ashes of her destroyed marriage? No, she wouldn't change it, because this life, with all its imperfections and challenges, was true. It was hers, and it was beautiful. Isabella went back to bed, but before sleeping she picked up a journal she had started writing. Every night she jotted down thoughts, feelings, memories. One day, when Hope was older, she would read it, and she would understand that life is rarely perfect, but it is always worth fighting for truth and love. She wrote, "Dearest Hope, if you're reading this, it's probably because you asked about your father, about why he isn't in our lives, and you deserve to know the truth, adapted for your age, of course. Your father was a man who forgot how to be honest. He let fear and envy guide his actions instead of love and integrity. He hurt many people, including me, but here is what I want you to know more than anything. You are not defined by his mistakes. You are defined by your own choices, your own values, your own kindness. Blood may connect you to someone, but it is actions, love, and respect that truly make a family. And you, my darling, have a family that loves you more than words can express. Grandparents who adore you, an uncle who would protect you with his life, a mother who sees you as the greatest gift she could ever receive. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Never accept manipulation or disrespect. Your voice matters, your feelings matter, you matter. And if you ever find yourself in a difficult situation, as I did, remember, you are stronger than you think. You come from a line of fighters, of people who choose truth even when it hurts. And you are never ever alone. I love you today. I will love you tomorrow. I will love you forever. Mom. Isabella closed the journal and put it in a safe place. Then, finally, she allowed herself to sleep. And for the first time in a very long time, she slept deeply, without nightmares, without fears, only peace.